Hello, my name is Stephen Phillips, and I am the North Team Manager of the FAA's Airspace and Procedures Team in the Central Service Center located in Fort Worth, Texas, and I'll be your moderator for today's meeting. Welcome to the first of two FAA meetings on the proposed modifications to the Chicago Midway International Airport controlled airspace. We're meeting to solicit comments on the current proposal's effect on local air traffic operations. The second meeting will be held tomorrow evening at 6 p.m. Central Daylight Time. Today, the meeting will start with an FAA presentation of the proposed Chicago Midway International Airport Class C redesign, followed by presentations from individuals that pre-registered to present at today's meeting. For those of you who are joining us on Zoom, your microphones are muted and cameras are off. Afterwards, we will open the meeting for a 30-minute question and answer session for all attendees via Zoom and the FAA's social media platforms. To submit a question during the Q&A session, please place your question in the Q&A tab on the Zoom platform. If you are attending this meeting via social media channel, please click on the Q&A link in the comments section to be directed to our Google form. If you're having technical issues connecting to the virtual meeting, you can text our tech support number anytime during the workshop. Once again, I'd like to welcome you to the FAA's Airspace meeting on the proposed modifications to the Chicago Midway International Airport controlled airspace. The FAA is considering the redesign of the Midway Class C airspace to increase the margin of safety between aircraft landing at Midway and aircraft flying visually along the Lake Michigan shoreline. The purpose of the meeting is to solicit comments on the proposal's effect on local aviation operations. Please note that the proposed modifications will not affect the number of aircraft in the area or the flight paths of existing air traffic. Instead, this modification is designed to assist air traffic controllers in separating arrival traffic to runway 22 left from general aviation traffic on the Chicago Lakeshore. This will be made possible because aircraft that conflict with arriving aircraft under the existing airspace design would be required to establish communications with ATC prior to entering the new shelf, which gives controllers a variety of options to ensure separation. Alternatively, transiting aircraft could opt to maneuver slightly to remain clear of the shelf, which would place them in a position which would preclude conflicts with arriving aircraft. As a result, the proposed modifications will increase safety by reducing the risk of conflicts between aircraft. The FAA will collect and consider all comments on this proposal, and we encourage you to send in your comments. You may do so by addressing them to Christopher Sutherland, Manager, Operations Support Group, Central Service Area, and sending them to the addresses provided on the screen. Please include Midway Class C in the subject line and submit your comments no later than Friday, October 29th, 2021. Your comments will give us valuable input. The FAA will review these comments and could modify the proposal based on their content. The final version will be published in the Federal Register as a notice of proposed rulemaking. I will now pass it to Al Qualiardi, Support Manager of the Airspace and Procedures Team of Chicago TRACON, to begin the presentation on Midway's Class C airspace redesign.
Hello, I'm Al Qualiardi, Support Manager of Airspace and Procedures of Chicago TRACON, and today I will be providing an overview of Chicago Midway airspace and the proposed Class C redesign. Chicago Midway International Airport is a major commercial airport located 8 miles from the Chicago Loop. It has an FAA control tower that normally handles more than 230,000 takeoffs and landings every year. The level of activity makes Midway the second largest airport in the Chicago metropolitan area in the state of Illinois. In 2019, it served almost 21 million passengers, making it the 29th largest airport in terms of passenger count in the United States, and a critical part of the United States national airspace system. Chicago Midway is an older airport that was built in 1927. Its runways were built to take advantage of the prevailing winds in the area. Aircraft take off and land into the wind, and today the runways at Midway are treated as two separate surfaces. You will see numbers on the runways, and those numbers indicate the compass heading the aircraft is facing as it lands or takes off. For example, at Midway you will see runway 4 right, 22 left, which is 40 degrees in one direction and 220 degrees in the other. Parallel runways that have the same headings carry the designation L for left or R for right for further identification. The movement of aircraft at Chicago Midway is handled by FAA Air Traffic Control. The FAA directs traffic through three-dimensional airspace, which are divided into airspace classes. Controlled airspace includes classes A, B, C, D, and E, and uncontrolled airspace is identified as Class G. For our purposes today, we'll discuss and focus on Class C. Class C airspace can be modified to fit the needs of a specific airport. It typically extends from the ground surface to 4,000 feet above the airport elevation. The lateral boundaries are normally designed as two concentric circles centered on the airport. One circle has a surface area with a 5 nautical mile radius, and the other circle has a shelf area with a 10 nautical mile radius. Radio communications with air traffic control must be established prior to entering the airspace. Aircraft using Midway International Airport include passenger jets, business planes, and general aviation aircraft. Most of these aircraft fly under Instrument Flight Rules, or IFR, and are required to fly on courses and at altitudes prescribed by air traffic control. Some private aircraft fly under Visual Flight Rules, or VFR, which means they must remain clear of clouds and that their courses and altitudes are determined by the pilot, with certain exceptions. Although VFR aircraft landing at Midway or transiting the Midway Class C airspace must be in communication with air traffic control, the shoreline aircraft which currently conflict with arriving Midway traffic are not in Class C airspace and are therefore not required to establish communications with air traffic control. The chart depicts the current Midway Class C airspace and the current O'Hare Class B airspace. The current Midway Class C airspace, outlined in orange on this map, is embedded under the existing O'Hare Class B airspace, outlined in blue. The current Midway Class C airspace encompasses a 5-mile radius around the airport from the surface to the bottom of the O'Hare's Class B airspace, and an additional outer ring beginning 5 miles from Midway to 10 miles from Midway from 1,900 feet up to the bottom of the O'Hare Class B airspace. The current Class C airspace has been in place long before the implementation of current satellite-based procedures. Conflicts between instrument and visual flight rule traffic have increased. In order to increase pilots' awareness, Midway Air Traffic Control Tower has developed an outreach program to inform visual flight rule pilots of the new approaches and issue cautionary notices. The current configuration of Midway Class C airspace does not include the final approach course for IFR arrivals to runway 22 left, RNAV GPS, Yankee, or Zulu, as shown by the purple lines. Aircraft approaching runway 22 left at Midway must use the curved course to avoid obstructions in downtown Chicago. The procedures account for approximately 1/3 of Midway's annual IFR arrivals. This approach path puts arriving aircraft in airspace that is occupied by numerous smaller aircraft flying by visual flight rules, represented by the blue lines. This creates a potential for separation losses between these aircraft. The Midway IFR arrival flight tracks trace a descending path that crosses the Lake Michigan shoreline from east to west. The FAA seeks to add to the current Midway Class C airspace, creating a new two-tier shelf in the area east of Midway along the Chicago shoreline. The addition will improve safety by ensuring separation between aircraft. Any changes will include an environmental review in accordance with all applicable laws. Aircraft approaching Midway are lined up into approach paths. Currently, the aircraft on the approach to runway 22 left can and frequently do cross paths with smaller VFR aircraft that fly along the Lake Michigan shoreline, as shown in the earlier graphic, making ATC intervention or the use of onboard collision avoidance systems necessary. The FAA seeks to address these encounters by modifying the Class C airspace to contain aircraft on approach to runway 22 left, when those aircraft are within 10 nautical miles of the airport. The FAA has studied this issue extensively and is proposing to change the existing Midway Class C airspace by adding a two-tier shelf adjacent to existing Class C airspace east of the airport. One tier of this shelf would be over Lake Michigan and would extend downwards from the base of O'Hare Class B airspace at 3,600 feet down to 2,300 feet. The second tier would be over land and also extend downward from the base of O'Hare Class B airspace, but down to 1,900 feet, aligning with the L2s of the shelf with the pre-existing Class C shelf to the west. The shelf would start at the intersection of the 5 nautical mile arc in ring and Interstate 290. The boundary would follow I-290 eastbound past the shoreline, continuing east to intercept the 10 nautical mile arc that extends south until it joins the existing 10 nautical mile arc. This new area would be divided into at the Lake Michigan shoreline as described, resulting in a shelf midway between the 5 and 10 mile arcs. I-290 and the shoreline will serve as visual boundary references, enabling pilots to clearly see where the boundaries would be. The proposed airspace modification would ensure that inbound IFR aircraft enters Class C airspace 10 nautical miles east of the airport and require VFR aircraft to either contact ATC for traffic advisories or remain clear of the new shelf. Pilot education is also a part of this proposal. The Midway Air Traffic Control Tower has developed an active outreach program and will use it to inform visual flight rule pilots of the new airspace. Chicago Approach Control and Midway Tower will also issue cautionary notices. Because of the plentiful visual reference points, VFR pilots will benefit from increased awareness of their proximity to the new shelf. I will now pass it back to Stephen Phillips to tell you about the FAA rulemaking process.
Thank you, Al. Any changes to Class C airspace must go through the rulemaking process. Rulemaking is the process federal agencies are required to use to make new regulations. Airspace changes such as this qualify as new regulations. The public has the opportunity to review and comment on the proposed rule, and the FAA is required to review and consider every comment. The FAA will pay particular attention to the comments received that contain new information or a new perspective, respond to specific questions the agency asks in the Notice of Proposed Rulemaking document, or offer different ideas on how the agency can accomplish the goals sought through the rulemaking. Once the agency has read and considered all comments, it will decide whether it will proceed with the final rule. The agency may adopt a final rule that is identical or similar to the initial proposal, or it might make changes based on the comments received. I will now pass it to Gregory Hines to describe the FAA's environmental review processes in more detail.
Hello, my name is Gregory Hines, and I am the Environmental Protection Specialist assigned to this airspace modification project. Before any changes can be made to the airspace, the proposed rule must also go through an environmental review, which was required by the National Environmental Policy Act of 1969, or NEPA. NEPA requires the FAA to review potential environmental impacts of the proposed action. The FAA will review public comments and will complete the NEPA process prior to implementation of the proposed airspace modification. The review includes a preliminary technical review, a preliminary environmental review, an internal review, and choice of appropriate NEPA review, which could include extraordinary circumstances and significant impacts. I will now pass it back to Steve to go over the next steps for this proposed airspace modification.
The next steps in the process will be as follows. Comments will be accepted until Friday, October 29, 2021. The FAA will consolidate and review comments. The FAA will consider comments and incorporate pertinent modifications. Publication of Notice of Proposed Rulemaking for Midway Class C Airspace Proposal in the Federal Register. And this notice will include its own 60-day comment period. And finally, the FAA will finalize the environmental review. Thank you for watching our presentation regarding Midway's Class C airspace. Again, we encourage you to send in your comments, which you may do by sending them to Christopher Sutherland, Operations Support Group Manager, at the addresses provided on the screen. Please include Midway Class C in the subject line and submit your comments no later than Friday, October 29, 2021. Before we move on to those of you wishing to make presentations or participate in the Q&A, by the way, you may start submitting your questions for that now if you'd like. But before we get to that point, I'd like to discuss just one sentence in the 633-page document that constitutes our primary air traffic control order. The order number is Joint Order 7110.65, named, not surprisingly, Air Traffic Control. The sentence is located in Chapter 2. Chapter 1 is essentially required boilerplate administrative language. That being the case, the words in this sentence are effectively the very first words in the document that has governed the actions of every air traffic controller in this country since 1976, 45 years ago. It's the first sentence because it's by far the most important one, and you can see it on your screen there now. The primary purpose of the ATC system is to prevent a collision involving aircraft operating in the system. That sentence has gone through a few iterations since 1976. At different times, it's contained language about orderly traffic flows, efficiencies, and many other things that are certainly important, but left it to the reader's imagination as to what the most important job for the FAA is. So for me, what it says now is better. It's more to the point, more to the core of what is the most important value of every controller who's ever pressed a transmit button and everyone else in the FAA who supports the national airspace system. Orderly traffic flows and efficiency are very important, and we strive very successfully to maintain the most orderly and efficient air traffic system in the world. But on occasions where efficiency and safety are at odds with each other, which does happen, efficiency takes a backseat to safety as far as I'm concerned, and almost certainly as far as you were concerned too. We'd all prefer that our planes take another lap around the airport rather than have a controller clear us to land with another aircraft on the runway, which hasn't accelerated to takeoff speed as quickly as we needed it to. So we send you on that lap 10 times out of 10 because of that first sentence in what we call the controller Bible. That's the reason we're proposing this, just the one, to prevent collisions, to prevent even the possibility of a collision. The mix of aircraft in this area is such that we feel we must create this shelf to effectively ensure we have prevented the possibility of risky encounters there. Anyway, I wanted to bring this up because it is such an important tenet to those of us in the FAA, and the public should know that. For those of you just now joining us, I'm Stephen Phillips, the moderator for this meeting. If you're having technical issues connecting to the meeting, you can text our tech support number anytime during the meeting at 949-478-0253. Next, we'll hear from those who indicated via their meeting registration they would like to give a presentation or comment during this meeting, followed by a 30-minute question and answer period. For the presentation, I will first read the presenter's name and then unmute their microphone in the Zoom webinar. Each person may speak for up to 3 minutes, after which we will move on to the next presenter. Instances of improper language will result in immediately being placed back on mute for the remainder of the webinar. And we are only accepting comments today that concern this proposal. We had several people sign up, but I believe we only have one that's logged in for a comment. So our presenter is Mr. David DeBruin. Mr. DeBruin, you have 3 minutes to speak. Please go ahead.
Thank you. I really have more questions than comments at this point. I am a private pilot that flies out of Chicago Executive regularly. And quite often, even on IFR flights, if I'm heading eastward, I might go up the lakefront if the day is good in the Chicago area before activating my IFR flight plan as I head east. It occurs to me in looking at the way that this shelf is designed that a pilot who's flying southward along the lakefront is going to be under the O'Hare Class Bravo space, the shelf that is at 3,000 feet, and will have to go down to 2,300 feet and then back up if they're going to go over the Gary airspace, back up to over 3,100 feet. Depending on the aircraft, given that it's about a 4-mile segment there, you might be between the proposed 2,300 feet ending on the south side and the Gary Airport airspace. It seems to me that that could be a little bit difficult for some aircraft. Furthermore, I'm curious why the shelf was proposed to come down to 2,300 feet rather than simply keep it at the 3,000 feet level that the inner O'Hare class Bravo space ends at, and whether that wouldn't make sense in terms of providing stable passage for general aviation aircraft as they head southward along the lakefront. That's the end of my comments.
Yeah, thank you to Mr. DeBruin. I do have a shorter answer for you. We've got a group in the back that's actually the brain trust. We're just pretty faces up here in front, but the reason for that is it was discussed during the ad hoc committee meetings, which we had earlier this year, which will come up later in this conversation, is that the crossing fix, as you saw in the presentation, is at 3,000 feet. Both the fix just off the shoreline and then the fix that's on the shoreline. So leaving the altitude at 3,000 feet and also allowing VFR aircraft to transit at the same altitude would kind of defeat the purpose of having the shelf and would not address the risky situations that we're trying to prevent there. AOPA was part of those conversations. So I'm sure you're familiar with the traffic collision avoidance systems that are on board most the larger aircraft at 500-foot buffer. And so the agreement that was come to was sometimes even that doesn't work. So now we have an extra 200-foot buffer. So if an aircraft is descending quickly, it won't generate a resolution advisory for non-existent traffic situations. So that was the reason behind that. And as I said, our back room is going to chew up your question there, and they have something more to add to that. We'll get to that later in the presentation. And if our question or answers are unsatisfactory to you, just please submit them in an email, and we'll get you a longer form answer that will answer your question. So as I said, Mr. DeBruin was the only one who logged in. He's our final presenter. And as I said, Mr. DeBruin, you can submit an additional question if you have that, or clarifying questions on the questions that you did ask in the email format, and we'll be happy to get to those for you. Next, we'll move on to the live Q&A based upon the questions we are receiving from Zoom and the FAA's social media platforms. If you're on Zoom, please submit questions in the Q&A tab. If you're watching on Facebook, Twitter, or YouTube, please submit your questions in the respective platform chat area. I'll read the questions from the attendees out loud for our panelists to address. I'd like to take the opportunity now to introduce our panelists for this evening. First, we have Al Quagliardi, Support Manager for Airspace and Procedures for the Chicago District and Chicago TRACON. Good afternoon, Al.
Good afternoon.
And next we have Sheree Obert, the Air Traffic Manager for Midway Air Traffic Control Tower. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Thank you. And finally, we have Mr. Gregory Hines, Environmental Protection Specialist who works at the Essential Service Center here in Fort Worth. Good afternoon, Gregory.
Good afternoon.
Okay, the first question we have. Will the airspace change lead to increased traffic or noise in the area? Sheree, care to address that?
The existing traffic patterns will not change. There'll be probably an increase in small aircraft flying off of the shoreline at slightly lower altitudes than they flew at previously, but this increase should not be undetectable over land. Gregory, would you have anything to add to that?
I'm not sure Gregory heard you, but yeah, and I'll echo what you said, Sheree. There will be the number of amount of traffic traveling up and down the coastline will not increase or decrease. And in respect to Mr. DeBruin's question, aircraft transiting along at 2,500 feet, just to give an example, would have to descend to below 2,300 feet to either fly beneath the shelf or fly slightly off the coastline to avoid the shelf, or just contact air traffic control and request to transit the shelf. All three of those are options.
I apologize, Sharia. My mic was muted there. I don't have anything to add to that. Everything you indicated there is good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next question. As a general aviation user, can I still fly along the Lake of Michigan City to Chicago coast? Al, want to tackle that one for us?
Absolutely. Great question. The simple answer is yes. The shelf will not impact you at all at altitudes below 2,300. You may need to alter your flight path slightly or to the east or descend slightly to avoid a shelf if you prefer not to communicate with air traffic control, or if ATC is unable to let you transit the airspace. So you can navigate east around it, descend below it, or contact ATC for clearance through it.
Okay, I think we all had a little computer glitch here. Next question. How will this airspace change impact general aviation users of the airspace, Cherie?
Steve, the impact will be minor for some pilots. Pilots transiting to 2,300 feet and 3,600 feet will have one of three options when approaching the shelf. They can contact air traffic control and request to enter the shelf at their current altitude, or maneuver slightly to the east to avoid the shelf, or descend below 2,300 feet to fly underneath it.
Okay, thanks, Al. Anything to add to that?
No, I don't. Thanks.
Next question. Can you describe the process that will occur after these workshops? Yes, I can. There are multiple actions required of the FAA after these meetings. The primary ones are these. After the comment periods ends for these meetings on October the 29th, the FAA will review all the input received and modify the proposal as appropriate. Then the proposal, the ad hoc committee recommendation, and all other materials will be sent to the policy division of the FAA's mission support services for their review. And once that's complete, a notice of proposed rulemaking is published, presuming there's no changes needed based upon that review. The notice of proposed rulemaking will be published in the Federal Register, and it contains its own 60-day comment period, as we mentioned earlier. After we consider the comments received from the NPRM, as we call them here, we'll modify the proposal if appropriate, and then draft and submit the final rule for publication in the Federal Register. Next question. I fly air tours of the city. Will I have to establish communications for Class C airspace at Midway? Al, how about you?
As long as you're below 1,900 MSL, you don't need to contact ATC, and there'll be no change from the current procedures. So, yeah, you're good at 1,900 feet flying below the new proposed Class C airspace.
And that's 1,900 over land. It's 20, and as we saw in the other graphics, there's 2,300 feet over the water. So we're two different tiers we're talking about here. So if you're flying tours over the city, below 1,900, and if you're flying over the water, it's 2,300. Cherie, did you have anything to add to that?
Nope, you covered it all. Thank you.
Next question. I'll give this one to you, Cherie. How did the FAA decide on 2,300 feet to be the bottom of the shelf? I kind of touched on that earlier. Is there anything else?
Happy to take it. So the purpose of the proposed airspace change is to ensure that aircraft on approach to Chicago Midway, runway 22 left, and those VFR aircraft operating along the shoreline receive pertinent traffic advisories, and that the potential conflicts that could that way can be effectively mitigated. The 2,300-foot floor is designed to eliminate undesired collision avoidance advisories on arrival aircraft and reduce potential of go-arounds or missed approaches due to these resolution advisories. Al, did you have anything to chip in on that?
Nope, you nailed it. That's exactly correct. Thanks.
The next question, how will this improve safety? Well, the shelf improves safety. We've touched on several points already, but it creates a requirement for all aircraft who wish to transit the shelf to either contact ATC or maneuver to avoid the shelf. As we said, over the water, they'll have to descend below 2300 or maneuver slightly further to the east outside of the 10-mile ring in order to avoid the shelf, or they can contact air traffic control for permission to transit it. Al, anything else?
Let's see. Yeah, I'd like to add that it'll improve safety because currently with the aircraft that are established on the 22 left final approach course, there's a known safety issue with traffic transiting the Lakeshore north and south. We have a documented history of conflicts between those aircraft. And as you know, you said at the very beginning, our responsibility is to provide separation and protect the flying public. And by instituting this proposed airspace, we've been able to a 700-foot buffer between 2,300 feet and the aircraft that are established on the final approach course at 3,000. We've redesigned the approach to have a 3,000-foot crossing fix at the Lakeshore, and then with the added 2,300 shelf, we greatly improve safety from our current condition.
Okay, thanks, Al. Cherie, will this shelf allow for more or less flights in and out of Midway?
Actually, the proposal will have no effect on the number of aircraft arriving or departing from Midway. That's our expectation right now.
Okay, thanks. Gregory, we've been skipping you. You have anything to add to that?
No, I don't have anything to add to that.
Okay, thanks. Next question. Did the FAA work with general aviation groups like Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association, AOPA, or other groups to make these changes? So as I suggested in my response to Mr. DeBrun, we had the ad hoc committee meetings earlier this year, which were led by a member of a local aviation group there in Chicago. AOP was there and represented and were vocal participants. And I'll have to say that the proposal as we're presenting it here today is exactly what that ad hoc committee recommended. And just so you know, the makeup of an ad hoc committee it's strictly members of the flying public. The FAA is prevented by law from being a voting member, so to speak, of that committee. But we were there and present for subject matter expertise and participated in that respect. But the proposal that we've showed you here today is 100% what we received from the ad hoc committee. Al, anything to add to that?
I'll make a short addition here that just to concur with exactly what you said, it was a group of aviation industry people from the Chicago area, hosted by the Chicago Department of Aviation, and it was a really modified. The existing proposal was modified from the original proposal through input of other parties that were involved. So it was really, I thought, a great process so far. And again, it's still open for comment or suggestions from this point forward. So that's all I'd like to add.
All right, thanks, Al. Yeah, those meetings, was my first experience of those meetings. Very eye-opening, very active group, and communicative with each other. And there was a little bit of give and take, but the spirit of cooperation was very high, I'd say. Next question. You mentioned resolution advisories. How many RAs have occurred? Is there any plan to utilize the RNAV, RNP runway 22 left X approach more when coming from the west? This way the aircraft never cross over the shoreline. Typically when approaching from the west, we will get cleared for the RNAV, RNP 22 left Yankee and get routed over the lake, crossing the shoreline 2 times. And what impacts are estimated to aircraft on the RNP Yankee runway 22 left versus the RNP X runway 22 left? Will this aid in the issuance of the RNP X? That's a lot to swallow there. I know you can see it too if you need a second to read it over.
You want me to take that?
Yes, please.
Okay. Yeah, sorry about that. The RMP X-ray is a tool for us to use to vector aircraft to or clear aircraft into Midway on. It's not the other approaches, the Yankee and the Zulu, that extend out to the east of Midway, give a better opportunity for sequencing large volume of traffic. The X-ray has a rather short curved final approach course, and it's not really practical to vector and sequence a large number of aircraft going into Midway. As far as the number of MORs, I don't know the number offhand, but when we did the staff study over the course of 5 years, there was a sizable amount of resolution alerts that occurred due to the conflicts on the final approach course in the VFR traffic going up and down the lakeshore.
Thanks, Al. Sheree, anything to add to that?
No, I concur. We still occasionally get them now, for VFR aircraft transversing the shoreline. So when we're on 22 left.
Okay, thanks. And those two people there have a ton of experience working in this airspace. I think Al mentioned the other day he had 40 years in the airspace, so he's very familiar with it, and probably no one better to speak to this topic than him.
I started when I was 10.
I was going to say the same thing.
or 5. I don't know.
He's a lot younger than he looks. Sheree, the proposed change will push VFR traffic lower and or further out of the lake. This will result in more VFR aircraft forced into a smaller corridor. ATC currently makes transit of the Class C nearly impossible for aircraft not landing at Midway. What considerations are being made for the safety of flight issues for VFR aircraft transiting the lakeshore?
Well, Steve, as you mentioned before, prevention of collisions in the national airspace system is the primary purpose of air traffic control system. The purpose for the proposal is to enhance the ability of air traffic control to provide positive control and traffic advisories and safety alerts to aircraft operating inside of the airspace. Currently, that ability is hindered due to the aircraft not being in radio communications with air traffic control because it's not inside of our airspace, Class C. The shelves were designed in order to mitigate safety of these flights, these issues. Al, do you have anything to add to that?
The only thing I'm going to add is during periods that Midway is not landing 22 left, there will probably be opportunity for aircraft to get clearance into the sea through ATC. So it's 30% of the time we'll be on 22 left, and other times you won't have that conflict exist. Now the clearance is going to be predicated on controller workload, so it's not a guarantee. If we're not on 22 left, they'll be able to go through, but the possibility does exist.
Well, just to follow on that, aircraft can actually descend below and not have to speak with air traffic control at all outside of the Class C airspace. So there is that option.
Thanks. Al, what was that percentage you mentioned? I missed that.
It's roughly a third of the time.
Third of the time,
30% of the time for 22 left.
And of course, this, when we talk about the shelf, it's actually an extension. So it's a little bit different situation right now because the actual Class C is closer and more in close proximity to the aircraft actually in a landing configuration getting close to the airport. That would be much more of a situation where we would be prudent to not allow someone to transverse aircraft through this airspace. Now, when the extension comes along, more than likely we could be better able to support.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. Great answer. Al, going back to you, will the Chicago VFR flyway planning chart be affected? Specifically, will there be a notification at both the north and south ends of the flyway recommending all pilots that transit through, above, and below the Midway Class C airspace?
The VFR flyway map currently exists. You can see it displayed there, where it's having altitudes that are below 2,500 feet. If you're coming from the north up by Northwestern, southbound along the lakeshore, approximately at or below 2,500 feet to get to Navy Pier, and then the altitude indicated there is at or below 2,000. Again, those are non-regulatory, those are suggested altitudes or non-regulatory altitudes that aircraft don't have to adhere to, at the time, all they have to do is stay outside of Class B and the existing Class C unless they get approval from air traffic control. So that the flyway won't change at all. It'll still be published. The altitudes may be modified to reflect the implementation of the C eventually, but they're not regulatory, and that actually exists now, and it hasn't prevented any of the conflicts that we spoke of earlier. So that's all I have.
Okay. All right, thanks, Al. Cherie, will aircraft requesting to transit the new Class C shelf contact Midway Tower or Chicago Approach? Do we know yet?
At this time, that decision has not been made. And when we work that together, we will be able to provide that in the general outreach information that will be provided to the public.
Thanks. Good answer. And that brings me back to the previous question regarding whether or not we're going to put notes on the flyway chart. There will be an active outreach program to local aviation airspace users that are going to describe the changes and educate the flying public. So this won't come as a surprise to them, right?
Correct. Absolutely.
Okay, Gregory, over to you. Are airplanes getting louder or quieter?
Thank you very much for that question, Steve. All new aircraft are more efficient and quieter. The FAA's Office of Environmental Energy has worked for more than 50 years with air carriers and manufacturers to reduce noise at the source aircraft engines. Extensive information is available to FAA. Extensive information is available at FAA.gov. And once you get to the website, you can search for Office of Environmental Energy and get more information regarding this particular question.
All right, thanks, Gregory. Next question. We talked about this just a second ago. What education will be given to the local pilots on how to navigate the new Class C area along the shoreline? Cherie?
So there is a Federal Aviation order, which its particular number is 7400.2, which covers airspace changes, and it does require that after issuance of a final rule designating Class C airspace, user education meetings are required to publicize the implementation of that Class C service. So, in summary, the FAA wants all pilots to have the tools necessary to safely navigate within the national airspace system, and we'll make sure to take the efforts to, during the implementation phase, to advertise these changes and educate pilots.
Thanks. That's required by law, but we'd have done it anyway. And that doesn't do us any good to have pilots who are unaware of airspace that have been implemented there, because all they can do is cause problems. So it's in our best interest, as well as the interest of the flying public, to be educated on the new airspace.
Yep.
Yeah. Next question. Will transitions to the lakefront still be approved similar to how they are currently? We'll start with you, Al, and move to Cherie.
Okay. Transitions along the lakeshore are currently uncontrolled below the O'Hare Class B. What this proposal will do is add another layer of airspace that allow VF aircraft to transit while receiving air traffic advisories, safety alerts, or they can remain outside Class C airspace if they elect to do so. But Cherie, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, the only thing I would add, Al, is just that the benefit of this Class C extension or change would be that pilots can be confident that if they're in that Class C, that they will be getting safety advisories and traffic alerts because they will be in close proximity to arrival aircraft if we are on that particular runway configuration. So, and if they are underneath or maneuver around, they can also be assured when not under air traffic control services that they are still in a safer position as they transit the lakeshore. That's all I got.
All right, thank you, ma'am. Next question. Isn't the increase in traffic to runway 22 left due to the change in O'Hare arrival traffic due to the change in runways? Previously, many airliners would come in from the southeast for landing, but now the runways are all east-west. Al, want to tackle that?
Certainly. Good question. The increase in traffic to runway 22 left is unrelated and unassociated with anything going on at O'Hare. Through the development of performance-based navigation and RNAV approaches, the 22 left runway has become available. It has become accessible through the use of curved approaches, where we can set up a final approach course that navigates around the tall buildings downtown, which makes runway 22 left accessible, which it never was before. Cherie?
No, agreed. There will be no changes. I mean, there won't be any changes due to O'Hare for us. The Class B airspace isn't changing either.
Okay, thank you. Gregory, over to you. Besides noise, if you'd care to elaborate on that some more, I'd love to hear it. Are there any other environmental considerations?
Yes, there are, Steve. Thank you for that question. FAA's environmental review considers several different categories, including air quality, biological resources, historical and cultural resources, and of course, noise, and et cetera. We encourage the submission of comments of any specific environmental concerns that the public may have.
Okay, thank you. Runway 22 left is used much of the time when runway 13 center would be the best runway for winds. Why not use 13 center more? This avoids the shoreline no matter if you were coming from the east or west, and they have ILS, RNAV, LPV, and RNAV, RMP, and AR approaches. Sorry to keep hitting you, Al, but you have a kind of a larger view since you're at the district. Would you mind starting this off on that one?
Well, yeah, from the TRACON perspective, we run the approach. Actually, we make a decision in collaboration with Midway Tower, and we're trying to align with the wind for the most part. 13 Center now has approaches RMP and RNAV GPS that we can access that runway to Midway without impacting O'Hare at all. So it's not really one affecting the other. We're trying to align with the wind, or if Midway has needs that they need to use one runway or the other, that's the ones that C90 will vector to. Cherie?
No, I concur. There have been changes to the approaches that have been less impactful when we're on conflict. We would have previously had conflicting approaches more often, and that has been greatly reduced. Would you agree, Al?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep.
But it did used to happen a lot more. Absolutely.
Okay, thank you both. One concern that came in from an AOPA member was about visual references to identify the outer ring, the outer boundary of the outer ring over water. The crib VFR checkpoint lies roughly along the boundary, but are other options available to help pilots identify the easternmost Class C boundary? Cherie, how about you?
I'd have to see the chart, or if you could bring up that picture again.
Yeah,
I actually have to read this a little bit here. So then the answer basically would be, just talking broadly, with the 10-mile arc proposal being over water, it's difficult to establish a landmark that indicates that boundary. I just had to see it for myself, sorry. But many pilots currently have distance measuring equipment and or satellite navigation tools that can assist in that for identifying that airspace boundary.
Yeah, that makes sense. Gregory, what type of environmental factors do you look into when adjusting such airspace?
Thanks again, Steve, for that question. The FAA's environmental review considers several different categories. We discussed earlier, which actually I answered earlier, including air quality, biological resources, historical resources, and noise, et cetera. And so if anyone additionally want to add some comments or have any specific comments, we'll be happy to address them regarding any environmental concerns.
Thanks. That's correct. If you have a more specific question than Gregory just covered there, feel free to send that question through the email address. That'll be up on the screen again later. So what you're essentially ensuring is you're not flying over any sensitive environmental lands, marshlands, anything like that that might be affected by the animals, and there might be affected by noise, or flying over any sensitive religious sites, those types of things. That's what you're up to when you're doing your environmental assessment, right?
That's correct.
Okay, thanks. If someone wants to continue with you, Gregory, if someone wants to make a noise complaint, how do they do that?
If anyone has a specific noise complaint that they would like to make a noise complaint, they would need to contact first and foremost, the Chicago Department of Aviation. We will be their first stop for noise complaints. And if they wish to file a complaint with the FAA, please, they can go to the FAA.gov/noise website, and it has a wealth of information on this position.
Yeah, and on FAA.gov, there's a wealth of information about all things related to this project, including the process that we're required by law to go through in order to create this shelf. So if you're looking for more information on that, that's where you'd go.
That's correct.
Yeah. Al, back to you. Why is the FAA going to all this effort to create this shelf? What problem is it trying to fix?
The problem is a recognized safety issue between VFR aircraft operating independently up and down the lakeshore on a course that intersects the runway 22 left approach at Midway. Midway arrivals on 22 left are recorded across the sales fix at 3,000. They remain until 3,000 until they cross Dixon, at which point they start their descent into the airport. The area between Sales and Dixon is where many of the VFR aircraft cross the 22 left final approach course, and they're at similar altitudes. So the approach was actually redesigned. The altitude at Dixon was lower. There was no fix actually at the lakeshore. We added Dixon and used 3,000 feet, and we did it in collaboration with industry experts that fly in and out of Midway. The existing Class E airspace at this location is a possibility of transiting VFR aircraft converging with 22 left arrivals with only one of those aircraft in communication with ATC. It's beneficial because VFR aircraft will either need to maneuver in such a manner that eliminates this convergence, or talk to ATC, who could now be able to provide separation services to both aircraft, not just one. And both aircraft would be aware of the other aircraft's position as a result.
Yeah, those are great points, Al. I'm younger than I look too, and as a longtime controller, the amount of things that can go wrong when you're talking to both aircraft involved in a proximity situation is pretty small, actually. And as it exists now, we're only talking to one of those aircraft, so that's the main reason for this, is to make sure we're talking to that second aircraft, either that or creating the shelf to require to that second aircraft to maneuver out of any place where he might be put at risk by aircraft arriving at Midway. Shuri, besides the increase in safety margin for IFR traffic from VFR traffic, was this proposal indirectly trying to reduce traffic flying along the lakeshore?
The answer is the proposal is not trying to reduce traffic flying along the lakeshore. The intent is to provide safe airspace for arrivals into Midway and increase the ability for air traffic controllers to provide traffic advisories and safety alerts.
Thank you. How will ATC frequencies change for those users who fly the entire shoreline? Will Midway have increased responsibility north of Montrose Harbor with the new airspace shelf? It would be easier / simpler if the shoreline flying used one frequency. Sheree, you want to start us off there, and then we'll go to Al.
Sure. At this time, the frequencies for the proposed Class C airspace have not been decided. The FAA understands that keeping the frequency changes to a minimum as important for the safety of the airspace is also of prime importance. And I know Al and I will be talking in the future, if this goes forward, more about this topic. How about you, Al?
Yeah, that's correct. We'll be in discussions with Midway Tower, Chicago Approach Control, and to ensure a seamless transition along the lakeshore. We'll have a lot of discussion about how we're going to do that, but it's yet to be determined. But I concur with it's ideal if we have just one frequency. We're not changing frequency several times through that airspace.
Yeah, good points, you two. Yeah, we're fully cognizant of the safety measure that's added when a pilot's not having to change frequencies again and again and again, because every time you ask them to do that, it's an opportunity for them to transpose a number incorrectly and not be speaking to a controller they should be speaking to. Next question. Will the new procedure allow jet and propeller aircraft to fly closer together? Al?
No, I would say no would be the best answer for that. We're just trying to provide a level of safety where one does not exist now. The procedure will enable aircraft to fly more efficiently on the approach to the airport. Excuse me. We're going to be operating under the same separation standards. There's going to be no changes to that. We're just looking to add a measure of safety between the VFR aircraft up and down the lakeshore and the aircraft established on the 22 left final approach course.
Thanks. Yeah, get that second aircraft on frequency so we can either talk to them or have them out of the way. Next question. When do we expect to have this Class C in effect? Well, we don't have a time frame currently established. A lot of it depends upon the comments we receive from meetings such as this. The ad hoc committee meetings we had earlier this year had a big impact on the amount of time it takes to process this. So we'll have a month to review your comments, and then we'll gather up our information, as I said earlier in the presentation, send that up to our headquarters in DC for their review, and they have their own time frames that they have to manage. But the best guess estimate, it could take between a year or two to complete. It could be a little sooner. I doubt that it would be much later than that, but somewhere in the 1 to 2 year period. Next question. Is the RNAV runway 22 approach fairly new approach? 31 circuitable land have always been common in the past. Al?
Runway 22 left, runway 22 left, Yankee and Zulu have been in use now for, I think it's around 5 years. So it's in the scheme of things, it's fairly new, but it's been around for a little bit now. In the past, the question is, or the way it's presented, we did use 31 circle to 22 left, which is it's a cumbersome approach for the pilots to fly down the 31 center localizer and then circle off to the northeast towards downtown and then circle back left to Midway to keep the airport in sight. It's that introduces a level of risk into the system much greater than allowing the aircraft to fly straight down the newer 22 left Yankee and Zulu approaches. Cherie?
I concur 100%. The other part of circling approach is that it's slightly not uncontrolled, but you really can't control as the pilots decide to make that circle. So some could be a little tighter circling in, some could be a little looser circle in. And so sometimes that also causes compression issues.
All right, thank you. What effect would this change on Part 107 operations have with remote pilots and drones? Cherie, would you care to expound on that?
Sure. The operations over people rule became effective on April 21st, 2021, and drone pilots operating under Part 107 may fly at night over people and moving vehicles without a waiver, as long as they meet the requirements defined in the rule. Airspace authorizations are still required for night operations in controlled airspace under 400 feet. And there is a website for that that you can reach through the FAA as well. And for any requests, I believe it's Drone Zone, and there's an acronym, LANCE, but it is accessible to the public.
Okay, thank you. Gregory, here's one for you. Is the FAA conducting an environmental review to comply with the National Environmental Policy Act? And we touched on this before. Anything else to add on that?
Thank you, Steve, again for that question. Nothing else to add. Again, the FAA, it will be reviewing potential environmental impacts associated with this proposed airspace change, and we will review input from the public and complete the NEPA process prior to implementation of the proposed airspace change whenever the process completely is complete, basically. Nothing else to add to that. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Next question. We've kind of touched on this earlier. The sectional chart shows a flyway along the coastline that appears to restrict VFR aircraft to 2,500 feet until the Navy Pier, and then 2,000 feet south of that. Why doesn't this solve the issue? As Al stated, those altitudes listed on the flyway chart are strictly voluntary. It's a recommendation, but pilots can and frequently do fly above that altitude, which brings us to this meeting today. A new shelf would require aircraft with flight paths that will enter the shelf to contact air traffic control to be provided separation services. They may be told to remain clear of Class C if there is conflicting traffic on the way in, or if the controller workload is such where they can't handle any more traffic, or the pilot can fly either below 2,300 off the coast or below 1,900 on the shoreline and avoid communication with ATC altogether. But those flyway charts, the recommended altitude on the VFR flyways are just recommended, not completely voluntary on the part of the pilot. Let's see, will the line extending to the southeast from the central ring disappear since it is all 1,900 feet? And can we bring up that the slide that shows the proposed shelf?
No, we need the Class C, the proposed Class C.
Yeah,
The proposed one.
while the backroom's searching for that slide, maybe it's coming up now. No, that doesn't contain the new one.
That's the existing C.
Mm-hmm. Sorry, I kind of threw you all for a loop in the back. Anyway, I was bringing that up. I'll go ahead and answer where the lower shelf is at 1,900. There should be no ring visible on the chart, but where the 2,300 shelf is located, there will be an indication on the chart. There you can see. Can't see the line along the shoreline, but the line does extend along right along the Chicago Lake Michigan lakefront. So hopefully that answers that question. If it doesn't, please either submit another one or and ask it on the email address. How do we get a copy of the slide deck? This presentation will be available on the FAA social media channels, including the one you're watching on now, shortly after this presentation, maybe today, but certainly within the next day or two. So every slide that you're seeing today will be available for you shortly. Just look on the page where you logged onto this presentation, and it should be available there. Gregory, this one looks like it's for you. The proposed change lowers the shelf from 3,600 to 1,900 feet over south side neighborhoods. VFR traffic will be flying substantially lower outside the Class C as a result. What consideration is given to the noise impact over the neighborhoods under the shelf?
Again, thank you, Steve, for that question. It's a very important question. The environmental review will review existing flight patterns and anticipated changes from the proposal in order to assess environmental effects, which I've discussed a couple times earlier. The environmental review is ongoing, and noise effects, as well as other types of environmental effects, will be included in the overall environmental review.
Okay, thank you. Next question. Will this new shell fully encompass the stadium TFRs that are often active in the summer? Sheree, how about you?
To answer that, so the TFRs are all done outside of the airspace design process. The proposal does not take into account any TFRs for local sporting venues at this time, or ever really. They're separate.
All right, thank you. Next question. Is Midway Approach Air Traffic Control prepared for the increased number of communications with GA aircraft along the shoreline? Will they allow transitioning through Class C? We don't really know who's going to be speaking to them yet. It's not really Midway Approach, it's Chicago Approach, Chicago TRACON, but until that's sorted out, Sheree, what do you think?
Well, from my perspective at this time, it hasn't been determined how we're going to work that airspace. So the Chicago TRACON and Midway Tower will be moving forward, working on that. Stuff like that's usually covered in a letter of agreement between the facilities and how that's going to go forward. Al, do you have anything you want to chime in on that?
Not really. It's yet to be determined. There will be some type of seamless transition along the lakeshore between Midway, the Chicago TRACON, and the user. That's going to look like the final product. It's yet to be determined.
Okay, next question is, how has the FAA made changes like this at other airports? The FAA is required to conduct biennial reviews of all Class B, C, and D airspace volumes. If these reviews indicate that changes need to be made to existing airspace and the local air traffic control facilities request, then the FAA can propose changes to the airspace. It doesn't happen that often, but changes such as this have been made in recent years at airports around the country. Bear with us just a moment. So why can't the FAA leave operations the way they are now? Al, you want to try that one out, precise?
I sure will. Thanks. The reason we can't leave it now is because we have a documented history of issues between aircraft that are transiting that particular area in our airspace, and Midway as well. So yeah, we have to be proactive and do something to alleviate that conflict. We all use the system. I fly, we all do. And we have controllers, supervisors, and everybody that works for air traffic in the Chicago area are dedicated professionals, and we need to, we see a problem that exists. We'd have to do everything we can to try to mitigate that risk. We're all aviation interested people, and we're safety related people, and we want to be active in fixing a problem that we see.
Thanks, Al. Sheree, anything to add to that?
I would like to add that the proposal that's been settled on by the industry committee members really provides also avenues for choice. The airspace can be avoided, and safety is maintained at the highest level in that way by ensuring that the aircraft, arriving on that 2-2 left approach are kept separated if someone chooses not to participate, and go through the Class C airspace. So it does avoid a lot. It does actually provide an avenue of choice.
And it's pretty hard to understate the importance of speaking to both aircraft that are approaching a proximity situation, and the odds of something unexpected happening are reduced greatly when a pilot is speaking to air traffic control, and they're more likely to tell them that they'd like to turn, and as opposed to when they're not speaking to them at all, which is the case now. We have no forewarning of that, so it's hard to understate that. And we feel that we've design the airspace to where the impact on pilots who don't wish to speak to air traffic control are as minimized as they can be. The next question is it anticipated that, lost my space. Is it anticipated that aircraft will not be allowed to transit the Midway Class C when runway 22 left arrivals are in use? Sheree?
So the answer to that is the access to the Class C airspace is considered based upon traffic in the airspace and controller workload, which is how it is now as well. And even when runway 22 left is active, aircraft may still be allowed to enter the Class C if current traffic and workload allows. So if it's a particularly busy inbound rush, there's a possibility that it would not be safe to allow a VFR aircraft in, but we generally strive to work those aircraft because we work for the public. So that's our goal.
Thank you. And we're just as much a member of the flying public as anyone out there listening to us today. So it's important to us too. The next question is, have there been any instances where Class B or C airspace was decreased or shortened? The only Class B or C area that was reduced in the recent past, and not quite that recent, was Atlanta Class B in 2013. We had provisions established for the consideration of reducing or shortening or resizing the Class B and C airspace areas. And many times the design configuration takes these reductions into account when the airspace areas are proposed and established. We have a lot of consideration when it comes to a Class B and C airspace in terms of just the advance of technology in aircraft, kind of inform changes on how the aircraft navigated, and those are intrinsically related to the shape of our Class B, C, and D airspace volumes. Next question, how do you know the new airspace will be safe? Sheree?
Well, for one thing, many other facilities in the country work VFR aircraft as well as IFR aircraft, and we have procedures in place that are used regularly to separate the two. So it's a tried and true regulation that we're required to do, but we also have to do that within the constraints of our own airspace. So we've determined that this is a need. And two-way radio communications with both aircraft is proven to be a much higher level of safety. And of course, when we do put in new procedures like this, we also do audits and rigorous safety reviews. And we also, in developing the proposed airspace design, we consider other examples of how this airspace classification around the NAS or National Airspace System with similar traffic makeup operates. So it's not done in a vacuum. And we also would not propose an airspace change unless we determine that it's safe. The FAA's first priority always is safety. Efficiency is really second, but I mean, it's our first priority, and that is the ultimate mission and goal of what we're trying to do here. Al, do you have anything you want to add?
No, I think you covered it very well. Thank you.
You did, Sheree. The next question. Let's go to Al for this one. Are you putting in these procedures so Chicago O'Hare can operate more flights?
No, the simple answer is no. The proposed modification of the Midway Class C airspace has absolutely no bearing on O'Hare traffic. The proposed procedure will not increase traffic at any Chicagoland airports. It will enable air traffic controllers to manage better the existing traffic in conflicts that exist within that traffic. We designed the airspace to allow flights to safely and efficiently arrive and depart Midway and transit up and down the Lake Michigan shoreline. It is not designed to accommodate a higher number of flights.
Yeah, like our favorite sentence in the controller Bible, we're here to prevent collisions. And touching back on the previous question, will it be safe? All of us are 100% convinced that it will be safe. Is it possible that something could happen there? It's always possible, but this is, we feel, the best solution to avoid to address a pre-existing risk at minimum impact to the flying public. Next question. What's the point of these outreach meetings? Will my views on this airspace change be seriously taken into account? And the answer is absolutely yes. As I stated earlier, we had the set of 2 ad hoc committee meetings earlier in the year to get the recommendations of local aviation experts and even the elected leaders of the surrounding districts. It was don't know the exact numbers I'm sitting here now, but I'm going to say there were probably around 20 or 25 people on that ad hoc committee, and they were surrounded by FAA people who were serving as SMEs. But the recommendation, as it's sitting in front of you today, came 100% from that ad hoc committee meeting with no influence from the FAA. We were there for subject matter expertise, as I said, but the reason we're legally prevented from participating in that is so we don't influence that decision in ways that are inappropriate. So the recommendation you have came from them, and we agreed with it. And we'll seriously consider all input received during these 2 meetings and consider changes to the proposal that would still allow us to safely address the issues between the aircraft landing at Midway and VFR aircraft along the coastline. And we still have a little bit of time left, so if you have any additional questions, please go ahead and send them along. We'll pause for just a moment while you do. There we go. Many single engine pilots wish to travel within the glide distance of the shore. Has any study been completed of the effect of restricting GA VFR aircraft flight below 2,300 feet on congestion below the shelf? Sri, you know anything about that?
I will be happy to answer that one. So right now, actually at this time, the FAA is not restricting GA VFR air flights below 2,300 feet. Aircraft that opt to not receive air traffic services will either need to fly below or outside of the airspace. So at this time, we have not studied an increase of VFR traffic below 2,300 feet, as we have now had any data to suggest that aircraft will not accept the ATC services.
Yeah, and as you said, this allows pilots a choice. They can either fly through the airspace, request to fly through the airspace with air traffic, fly below it, or fly outside of it. And if they're flying below it, they're going to be fairly close to the shore anyway.
Absolutely, and so if that's a source of concern, it's also an additional level of safety in that we can provide emergency services to any aircraft that may need them as well.
Okay, thank you. So any question at all, feel free to submit them. Okay, we heard from the public during the oral presentation earlier and provided a response at that time. Did anyone else on the panel have anything more to add to what we've discussed here so far?
I, for myself, thank everyone for coming to the meeting, and thank you everyone for the questions, and provide anything else to the information provided earlier. And thank you, Stephen, for moderating. And thank you for everyone else for helping me through the questions.
You're quite welcome. We've got another question, so before I continue
more questions.
All right. Is this a safety of flight concern? Why would it take 2 years? Shouldn't it be able to happen quicker? Complicated answer, but an excellent question. Airspace change processes are not done haphazardly and very detailed and regulated very strictly by federal law. The notice of proposed rulemaking and final rules that you heard us touch on earlier are required of all federal agencies. It's not an FAA rule, and very strict in making sure that we have done that correctly, and any deviation from that procedure results in the effort being kicked back to whatever agency submitted the NPRM. There are time parameters and different processes along the way that allow for as much feedback as possible from aviation stakeholders. The entire process typically takes between 2 and 3 years from the time of this meeting. The time should be 18 and 24 months, hopefully sooner than that, as I suggested. But a lot of that depends upon the comments that we receive from you all, which we'll be considering in totality starting on October the 29th, the deadline for submissions for comments to these meetings. Al, anything to add to that? It's more
No, I'd like to, like Cherie had mentioned earlier, I'd like to thank everyone for their input. I'd like to thank the ad hoc committee members, some that are on here, from what I understand. If you have input to give, don't hesitate. Submit the input, to the address that was given, and everything's going to be considered. The proposal has changed already, and we're open to further input if you have it.
Okay, thanks. And still getting some questions straggling in here. When will this be effective from? And as we just stated, there's no time frame currently established. We agree we'd like to get this put in as soon as possible, but not too soon either. We have to consider all those comments appropriately and making sure we're not rushing through that particularly, because our best input comes from members of the public, like those of you listening here today. The questions that you have asked will inform our own questions and our own analysis of this shelf. So another thing that can't be understated is our appreciation for you all joining us today and helping us out with that. But as I said, the NPRM and implementation phases could take between a year or two. One more question, keep them coming. Is there an operation rain check at Midway, Cherie?
At this time, there is not. And there are provisions and regulations associated with establishing one. At this time, there are no tours allowed into Midway because of pandemic measures. But it is a very valuable program. I don't know if we have a lot of outreach on that, but it is something that's alive and well pre-pandemic. So certainly worth looking at.
Okay, yeah. For those of you who aren't aware of what Operation Rain Check is, that's a platform for the aviation community, and generally it's pilots who are invited into air traffic control facilities where they transit the airspace very frequently and learn a little bit about the other side of the microphone and what goes on there. So it's it can be a very robust, depends on the local aviation community. So if you're interested in participating in that, I'm sure there'll be some outreach from Midway Tower, Chicago Tracon too, for that matter, where Al works, that will allow you all to take a tour of those facilities as soon as the COVID-19 is in our rearview mirror. Another one for you, Al. You mentioned a 700-foot buffer from between the fix and the floor. What is the significance of 700 feet? Could a higher floor be considered? 2,600-foot floor of Class C on the lakeshore would still allow VFR transition at 2,500 and provide a buffer.
That's a great question, and it was widely discussed during the ad hoc meetings, again with local aviation interests and interest flying in and out of Midway. The question correctly states that 500 feet separation is legal, and why don't we use it? But due to the restrictions of TCAS and our resolution advisories, the alerts that pilots get, the only way to guarantee that we're going to reduce those is to add an additional buffer beyond the 500 feet. So it was a recommendation actually that came out of the ad hoc committee to use 700 feet and make the floor 2,300 feet to compensate for the technological issue. The resolution advisory, when it exists between a VFR aircraft or any aircraft, any two aircrafts, is a huge distraction and alert, and it's disruptive to the flight process for the pilots, the controllers, everybody involved. So again, the 700 foot came out of the recommendation of the ad hoc committee, and that's what we submitted.
Yeah, those good points,
And
Al.
to, oh, sorry.
No, go ahead, Sheree.
No, I was just gonna say, and to add, follow on with what Al's talking about there. So with these resolution and advisories, people may not realize that I can't think of a single air carrier company that does not enforce some sort of evasive action. So the pilot, even if they see the other aircraft, depending on I can't think of a single company where they don't, they have to take an evasive action. So if they have to climb, that puts them, in an unstable approach situation, and they institute a go around, or it disrupts the approach, which is a very critical phase of flight, as all pilots know. So that's what we're really trying to avoid, is kind of just evade that piece of equipment.
Yeah, good points. And then in my experience, the pilot of the maneuvering aircraft frequently does see the VFR aircraft if they're required by company policy to comply with the resolution advisory. Like I was saying, 500 feet to aircraft flying level, the traffic collision avoidance system won't generate a resolution advisory, which the pilot would have to respond to, requiring them to climb or descend, whatever they're told to by the equipment. But if an aircraft is descending, as is the case with these Midway runway 22 left arrivals, and they're descending quickly, there could be a number of reasons why they've done that. But the pilot just got off a reserve weekend and wants to fly clean fast, or they got a late start on their descent. There are a number of reasons that are perfectly legitimate why that could happen. But if they're descending quickly, sometimes the equipment can't distinguish when the aircraft is going to stop. And you have to remember that a lot of VFR aircraft also have TCAS equipment on board too. So if their equipment sees an aircraft descending really quickly, they may have to take evasive action as well, because they don't particularly know if an aircraft's going to stop 500 feet above them or not. And they're stopping 500 feet to 700 feet above them by design in this case for that express reason. So because of 500 feet, it could generate a resolution advisory, which would cause the aircraft to have to climb, be resequenced, which creates a different set of risks entirely. And one more question. This will be the final one. Is there any consideration to be taken for airline pilots flying the RNAV Zulu runway 22 left with the changes? Al?
I'm not sure I completely follow that, but let me just say that before the runway 22 left approaches were developed, aircraft landing runway 22 left would follow a straight in approach for a different runway, in this case at Midway 31 center from the southeast, and then circle the runway 22 left. The proposed change is not anticipated that change the approach. It will enhance safety. So, I mean, we're giving all consideration to everybody out there on the runway 22 left approaches, Zulu, Yankee, the VFR traffic transiting the shoreline. We're trying to consider everything and everybody's safety needs that's flying in that Chicago metro area.
Okay, thanks, Al. So I've gotten to Sheree and Al. Gregor, do you have anything that you wanted to add that you weren't asked?
No, I just wanted to echo the comments made by my co-panelists. Thank everyone for participating in this meeting this afternoon. If there are any additional environmental concerns, please address them with us, and we'll make sure that we address anything that's brought forth. Thank you very much.
All right, thanks, Greg. And thank you for attending this Chicago Midway Informal Airspace meeting. A recording of this event will be available on the FAA's Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube channels later this evening. The FAA appreciates your time and comments, and we thank you for being involved, members of the aviation community. Our work's made better when we hear your perspectives. All comments received during these meetings will be considered prior to any revision or issuance of the notice of proposed rulemaking for this airspace. Thank you for attending. This concludes our meeting. Have a great rest of your day.